Janelle's grandpa was short and stout. She always loved that she felt like, even as he aged, he still held on to something childlike. He wore goofy clothing, green pants, checkered flannel shirts, and always a little hat. He seemed to always be happy, and Janelle loved him so much. Janelle always got to spend most of winter vacation with her parents. She always enjoyed it. In fact, she'd never spent a Christmas in her own home. Her mother and father would always join her and Grandma and Grandpa up in the woods. Grandma would bake cookies and let Janelle decorate them with icing and sprinkles and gumdrops. They'd light a fire in the fireplace, put on their PJs, wrap up in blankets with hot cocoa, and that's when Grandpa would always tell the same story. He'd never tell her the end, though, even when Janelle would plead and plead. He told her that one day, when she was 13 years old, he would finally reveal the end of the story. And Janelle was 13 this winter. She was so excited. She thought that maybe it was silly to be as excited as she was, but she'd waited a long time. Tonight, Janelle was decorating cookies, and her grandma let her keep out 2 of her favorites to eat with her hot cocoa. After they were done, Janelle and her grandparents went to put on their PJs, and when Grandpa came out of his room, he looked so silly. His pants were red and flannel, and his shirt was white and red striped. He had a hat on that looked like that old-timey newsboy style. "Well, is it story time yet, Grandma?" he asked, as he jumped up onto his favorite chair, his feet dangling just a bit. "Yes, I suppose it is," she replied. "Yay!" Janelle yelled. Grandma took a seat on the floor by Grandpa's feet next to Janelle. "Okay," he said as he lit his favorite brand of cigar. From Germany, he'd always told Janelle. She loved the way it smelled and the way it swirled up around his head. Then he started his story. "See, long before I met Grandma, the love of my life," and he winked at her, "I was a boy in Germany. Growing up was hard back then. Children may make fun of kids who were different, and I was different. I was born smaller than most and didn't grow as much as most either. I spent a lot of time reading books, though. I didn't play outside much. One day on my way to high school, when I was in my senior year, a piece of paper seemed to come gliding through the air from nowhere, and it landed at my feet. Well, I picked it up, and it was an ad for a part-time job in a toy store. I knew right then that that was a job for me. I could show children from all over that being different didn't mean I was scary. I could place a toy into their hands, and when they'd see me, they'd see joy instead of apprehension. I went to the toy store and met the man who ran the store. He was an older man. His hair had some red in it still, but it was graying. Most of it was turning white. He was round in the face and body, and seemed to be quite jolly. The children in the store loved him, and he would walk by each one and pat them on the head and chat them up a bit. The parents thought that he was wonderful. I felt right at home, and he put me to work immediately. It went quite well for some time, but then, one afternoon, there was a child who came in with his father, and he seemed to be quite spoiled. He demanded to see a rather expensive toy, a hand-carved ventriloquist dummy, a real work of art. It looked almost real. It had been there on the shelf behind the counter since I'd started. My boss chuckled and told the boy that this toy was the only one that wasn't for sale, that this toy was his, and that he had handcrafted it many years ago and treasured it very much. The boy became angry, and his father looked to be in desperate want to please his son. "Please, sir, he dearly wants it. I'll pay you anything you'd like." My boss replied that no amount of money could persuade him, and then he went about his business. The child was making such a racket that the father suggested that perhaps I could at least let him touch it, and I saw no harm in that. I took the dummy off the shelf, kneeled in front of the screaming boy, hoping that this would help to soothe him. Suddenly, the boy grabbed the arm of the dummy while trying to take off running, and the arm broke off and the dummy fell onto the ground, breaking its head. The man grabbed his son's arm and scurried off, and just then, my boss came around the corner and saw me, holding the broken dummy. He did not ask me what had happened. His face grew red, and his expression turned into a grimace, and under his breath he scolded, Some people should not have children. And then his eyes met mine. He gritted his teeth and told me to go downstairs and wait for him while he closed up. I'd never been downstairs before. I hadn't been allowed to. My boss had his office down there, and I'd assumed that toy shipments must have been delivered through the back door, as we never received them through the front door. I walked down the stairs, and as I did, the sound of Christmas music became louder and louder, almost intolerably loud. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw that the basement was decorated festively. A tree, tinsel, knickknacks, etc., and a fireplace. The basement was lit only by the light of the fire, and as I stood there, I felt as if I was being watched. Then, somebody ran past me and threw a poker into the fire. They were so fast that I couldn't make out any features other than that they were small, like myself, but I didn't know if they were adult or child. Soon my boss came down the stairs, and the room started to stir. I could hear whispers and muffled sounds like screaming. Suddenly, a light was turned on, and I saw my boss. His mouth was turned into a menacing expression. His eyes were coal black. He was rubbing his hands together. Then the small figure again came into view for just one moment and placed a pipe, a cup with something steaming in it, a newspaper, and a scroll onto my boss's desk. He moved to his desk and he sat down. He said not a word to me. I finally took my gaze off him and looked around the room. It was much larger than I'd first seen, much, much larger. There were small creatures sitting at tiny desks. Some desks had sewing machines, others carpentry and carving tools, others electronics, and still others parts for dolls. But there was no sound now, no movement. All had their eyes on my boss as he sat at his desk near the fire. Then, without even glancing my way, he demanded that I come stand at his desk. I walked over and stood on the side across from him. "No!" he boomed. "I said stand next to me." I stepped a bit closer. "Are you deaf?" he yelled. "Stupid?" he asked. "No, sir," I replied, my voice shaking. "Then come stand right here." And he pointed to a spot. I stepped onto the spot where he had pointed. "Did I tell you not to let that spoiled little maggot have my toy?" "Yes, sir, you did." I was shocked to hear him like this. "Then why would you allow him to put his nasty hands on my property?" I began. Stop your weakness, boy, and answer me now." "I thought it would get him to stop crying," I said. "Stop crying?" he gasped. "You thought that you were going to give him my possession to touch, to get that disgusting excuse of a child a chance to touch what's mine? That sniveling brat, that vile thing? You thought that you needed to help him stop crying because he couldn't have what he wanted?" "Yes, I guess so." With that, he stood up and with a flash grabbed the poker from the fire and stuck it into the flesh of my abdomen. I was always speechless by the time we got to this part. I never knew if the story was real or not, but why would Grandpa tell it to me on this holiday? I quickly ran for the stairs, and as I was running up them, I heard the man laughing hysterically. "One day, boy, we will meet again, and when we do, you will pay me back with a child, and that child will become my new dummy, and it will sit on my shelf for eternity. Do you hear me, boy?" This is where my grandpa would say, and I never looked back, and I would say, "Who was it, Grandpa?" And he'd reply, "Oh, one day I will tell you, Janelle, one day, when you're 13. Tonight, though," he lifted up his striped shirt just a tad bit, and I saw an angry red scar on his belly. I gasped, "Grandpa, is that real?" "Yes, dear, it is real." My grandmother pulled me in close. "Who did this to you, Grandpa? Who?" "You are old enough to be told now, Janelle, and understand why we bring you to our home for the holidays." "Yes, Grandpa, but who?" I asked again. He took a long drag off his cigar, stared intently at me. Then, after another moment, he whispered, "Santa Claus, dear."